James Madison called it the first branch of government. The founders deliberately designed Congress to hold more power than the presidency or the courts. It dictates the details of daily American life, initiating and approving everything from the structure of our national healthcare policies to exactly how much we pay in taxes. Yet, Congress is internationally famous for completely failing to finish its most basic, important work. The two houses frequently fall into paralyzing legislative gridlock, unable to agree on a path forward. If a regular employee failed this often, they would be fired. But in Washington, more than 90% of sitting members of Congress win their re-election campaigns. A body that cannot do its job, but almost never loses its job, doesn't happen by accident. Modern politicians have learned exactly how to manipulate the founders' original design. The Constitution divided Congress into two completely separate parts. This bicameral legislature was built specifically to force compromise. On one side is the Senate. It is capped at 100 members, 2 for every state, regardless of population. With 6-year terms and rules that give outsized power to the minority, the Senate was built for continuity and slow, careful deliberation. On the other side is the House of Representatives. It is much larger, with exactly 435 members divided up based on state population. They serve short 2-year terms, creating a fast-paced environment driven entirely by majority rule. For any proposed law to reach the president's desk, both of these radically different houses must agree on its exact wording. Neither can act without the other. When these two groups inevitably clash, work grinds to a halt. The gridlock we see is the deliberate mechanism the founders built to prevent extreme laws and force a national consensus. Because the two houses represent people differently, they use completely different maps. A senator's territory is locked to their permanent state borders. The map for the House of Representatives is constantly shifting. The trigger for this shift is the national census. Every 10 years, the government officially counts the population. That count dictates a mathematical process called reapportionment. Because the total number of House seats is permanently capped at 435, states with booming populations take congressional seats away from states that are shrinking. Once a state knows how many representatives it gets, its local legislature physically draws the new geographic boundaries for those specific seats. This is known as redistricting. Since the early days of the Republic, state leaders have manipulated these boundary lines to give their own political party an explicit electoral advantage. It's a practice known as gerrymandering. Look at this animated map to see how it works. One major tactic is packing. Mapmakers draw lines that cram as many opposing voters as possible into a single district. The opposing party wins that one specific seat by a massive, useless margin, leaving them weaker everywhere else. The remaining opposing voters are subjected to cracking. They are sliced up and distributed across multiple districts, where they will always be stuck in the minority, completely diluting their voting power. Over the years, the Supreme Court has struck down maps drawn with explicit racial bias or vastly unequal populations. However, drawing bizarrely shaped districts for purely political reasons remains widely used. By aggressively packing and cracking their opponents, the party in power creates incredibly safe districts for their own members. They dictate the outcome of the election years before a single voter casts a ballot. Manipulated maps are just the outer defense. Once a politician actually gets into Congress, they operate inside a fortress of unique advantages. They secure massive material benefits, including a baseline salary of $174,000, elite pensions, and huge taxpayer-funded allowances to cover their staff and travel expenses. They also enjoy specific constitutional privileges. Members of Congress cannot be sued for anything they say on the House or Senate floor, granting them total legal immunity to speak freely during debates. Modern politicians amplify these built-in resources with technology. They use campaign websites, targeted email lists, and social media feeds to constantly broadcast their achievements, turning everyday office operations into a 24/7 re-election machine. Every challenger is running against a fully funded, legally protected, and data-driven institution. Even with this rigid protection in place, the actual makeup of Congress is evolving. For much of American history, the legislative branch was composed almost entirely of middle-aged white men. Over the last 60 years, the electorate has steadily voted in more racial, ethnic, and gender diversity. But whether we look at the representatives of the 1950s or the representatives of today, their defining characteristic remains extreme job stability. The paralyzing gridlock in Washington is the result of a system carefully designed by the founders to ensure consensus. The 90% re-election rate is the result of modern politicians building an ecosystem where they simply cannot lose.